So you and other researchers have been tracking the costs of this diet over time to see how it's changed, and you've already mentioned currently it would be about $190. So on the one hand, you have these increasing food prices or inflation of food prices. Can you talk about what's happened with the social assistance rates over this time, though?
Well, the single Ontario works rate is $733 per month. Now, just if that rate of $520 back in 1995 had the government of the day, I guess that would have been the Harris government at the time, had announced what they've just announced for ODSP, and that is an increase plus indexation. So let's say that that $520 rate had been, at that time, they say, okay, we've cut it by 21.6%, now we're going to index it. That rate would now be somewhere between $905 and $910. So successive governments, both PC governments and Liberal governments, that single rate continued to track behind inflation, and now is about $170 below the amount that would have been even if we had started from that low base rate of $520 a month. I guess the other big thing that's happened in the ensuing 27 years from 1995 is that what we've seen is, in terms of the types of food, is that what we might call more marginal food, let's say, the sort of thing that you would get in a convenience store because you can keep it fresh and wrapped, and it can last for a long period of time, but is not necessarily all that nutritionally sound. At first, that was the food that was rising fastest, and we were finding that vegetables, fruits, and certain sorts of meats. You got to remember that the fish farming revolution was happening at the same time, and fish that used to be quite expensive became much cheaper. Supply chain improvements and changes kept fruits and vegetables down, especially through the period from about 1995 to 2010, whereas other parts of that diet were increasing, but at least the good news was that the good food was not rising as fast as what we might think of the bad food. But in the last 12 years, from 2010 to 2022, the food that is not as nutritionally sound has increased at a lower rate, and it's the fresh fruits and the vegetables, the things that you got to consume within a time period because they are fresh. Those have risen the most. So the nutritional aspects of it have deteriorated in the last 12 years, even more so. And when you look at dairy, for example, over those 27 years has risen quite modestly, despite what people may believe. But when compared to fruits, vegetables, and the protein stuff, meats and substitutes, those are the ones that have been rising fastest. And so 733, when you do the math, if you can possibly get I live in Scarborough, Ontario, and the cheapest accommodation, a shared room, is now $600. So if you do the math, you got $133 left for everything else. And what people often do is they will pay their internet first and then move on to because food is it's not a fixed amount. Like, you have to pay the rent's a certain amount, you got to pay the rent. You can't go to the landlord and say, well, what if I pay you $100 less per month? That's not going to go over well, but you can scrimp on food. At least nobody's going to be out there saying that you can't.
Right.
there's no
Right.
there's no contractual relationship with yourself, so to speak, or
Yeah.
and the grocery store doesn't doesn't nudge or doesn't tell you what you should buy or not buy. So people often scrimp on food, and what you see with food banks, for example, people saying that there's quite a significant number of people who said they've skipped meals, or they have if they have children, they'll skip the meals themselves in order that their kids will have food.
Right. Right. And I mean, as you said, there is no fixed amount for food. There's an amount for shelter, and if you lose your housing and you're living in a shelter, for instance, or you're homeless, they actually take that portion away, so that
Yeah,
you are best off, doing what you can to maintain shelter and then going to free programs for food because they won't take away part of your benefit because you're finding free food.
yeah. Well, that's routinely since it's clear that you cannot survive on 733 a month, especially in a city. Not unless you have special situation shelter, either subsidized or you're in a co-op or there's some sort of charitable arrangement. But if you're in the what we call private sector housing, you simply can't live on the 733 per month. So other fixed costs are like a bus pass. So if you need a bus pass or
Right.
a subway pass, like in Toronto or Ottawa or a more larger city, then you wouldn't be able to pay for that. So what I find that Ontario Works single people actually do is they'll live on the amount that they receive at the beginning of the month for a few days, and then they have an elaborate schedule, often that they've memorized. But it's really, in listening to people, it's actually quite spectacular what they've done. It was almost like the first thing I thought of was like a map to a gold mine, like with all these meticulous, and basically they will know what meal they can have on a particular day in a particular place, and they'll either walk or bike, especially if they can't, if they don't have access to transit. Sometimes they can get tokens or a pass from particular programs, and they'll either go to a food bank or a meal program. um, but again, unless you have some sort of public transit, bringing something back from the food bank can also be difficult if you're trying to bring it back on a bike or walking it.
Right.
So really, the only alternative people would have is try to, I guess, some sort of worker training, something that's going to give them a bit more money, but the amount they're allowed to keep is only $200 a month before it starts to be clawed back. And uh, again, as we talk about inflation, that $200 that they're allowed to keep was last changed in 2013. So we've gone from 2013 to 2022 without any change in that amount. So that too is eroded to inflation along with the rates.